Once upon a time in a land called America, the multiverse. Once upon a time I can never forget being young and reading stories that began with the words, once upon a time. With those 4 simple words I knew that I was about to be transported into a wondrous world of invention and creativity, though as a child I couldn't express my feelings with such big words. But what I couldn't express in words I more than made up for in feelings and emotions. Heroes and villains were readily identified and understood. The trials and tribulations of the characters were not just words on a page. They were feelings from my heart. When characters cried, I cried too. When the characters were afraid, so was I. Fairy tales are those stories we remember with a fondness that we likewise reserve for old memories of family and friends, of a time when this world was a much simpler place, less complicated, and more secure. As I began getting older, my education began. To school I went. And the books I began having to read no longer began with once upon a time, they began with facts. Something known to have happened, to be true or exist. And what I began to learn was astounding. My parents had lied, a white lie of course, and there was no Santa Claus. My Sunday school teacher had lied, and instead of God making us, I found out we came from monkeys. My brother had lied to me, and the church steeple in our town that I had believed was the tallest in the world just wasn't true. And like my fellow students, I began to see a certain truth of life, that people will lie to us to get us to believe some really stupid things, including our parents. So, I began my education still respecting my parents but never wholly trusting them with truth and facts. That particular trust I reserved for my teachers. And teachers knew everything. Well, imagine my disappointment in getting older still and learning that teachers not only don't know everything, but even if they did, they wouldn't be able to tell their students. And every high school student who ever walked the halls from class to class knows that a game is being played with us, the students, being the pawns pushed around on the chessboard of life. Far from being places of education, schools as we've known them in our lifetime are more for indoctrination, which means to fill a person's mind with certain ideals or beliefs not natural to them. And the first thing to go is the magic and mystery of any story that begins with, once upon a time. Why? Because they are the 4 most dangerous words in the world, that's why. I want you to understand something very important now, something which you instinctively have known since you first set foot in the first school you had to go to. Schools are not for educating, they are for indoctrination. Their purpose is not for the education of children, but rather they are an invention of man's for the sole purpose of producing robots, working robots. The early days of the Industrial Revolution saw the large textile plants of England struggling to survive because they couldn't keep workers, no matter how much they paid them. The problem was that human beings were not meant to do that type of work. Human beings are first and foremost social creatures. We live and breathe to be a part of our families, our tribes, our neighborhoods, our countries, our societies. We had lived centuries by the sun, by the moon, by the stars. Knowing without clocks and calendars when to plant, when to harvest, how to live with nature, not against it. We knew as a species how to cooperate with our environment, we never had thoughts about destroying it. Safety and security were not measured by the accumulation of money and property, but rather by how we were able to provide food and shelter for our children and tribes. There were no laws needed to ensure that children were protected and senior citizens provided for. They were the 2 most looked after groups of every tribe, regardless of skin color, regardless of geography. It was simply the way things were. But times were indeed changing, and a new man was needed, a new type of man, an industrial man. But this type of man isn't born, he has to be created. And they said, "Let there be industrial man." So schools were created, and it was so. Have you ever thought about what exactly a school is? What exactly it teaches children? Your children? Well, it's simple. In order to create the industrial man, you had to take children and first of all destroy their confidence in their parents and or family structure. You then had to destroy their belief system in anything other than the absolute authority of the school and its teachers. So once the schools destroyed the family and God, they were then free to fill in the blanks with anything they so chose. And what did they fill in? Well, for starters, they took children and put them in an environment where they were forbidden to talk to each other, even though they were sitting right next to each other.